Hey, last week, Virginia and I were absent. We were in Tennessee. We've got 3 children, grown-up children that live there doing their thing. And our middle son and his wife are having a baby, Lord willing, in October. So we participated in a baby bash, and it was a lot of fun. All our kids got to come in. One of them lives in Philadelphia. He flew in. So the brothers got to be together. My mom lives there. She's a widow. So it's good to see her from time to time. Actually, she tunes in. It's great to see you anytime, Mom. Just occasionally we're able to get up there. That's what I mean. Where am I? James. Beginning of the summer, we thought it'd be a great idea to study James. It fits right there, kind of June, July, August. We'll be wrapping up next week or the next. And James was Jesus' half-brother. Got to catch that one. Same mom, different dads. So he had a bird's eye view of, Jesus, adolescent Jesus, if you can imagine such a thing. So the teachings of Jesus and his followers were outside James's understanding for a while, because Scripture lets us know that James was, he didn't grow up believing his brother was the Messiah. As many of you who have brothers probably grew up without thinking your brother has messianic tendencies either. But at some point, James got it, and he was able to testify about the realities of Jesus and his ministry like nobody else could. And so he wound up being in a pretty significant leadership role in the first century church. And this letter he wrote late among the Bible letters, and it was intended to be circulated to all the known churches at the time. So there's some things that are very prescriptive in his letter, universally appropriate and to be practiced. So often he'll ask a question, he'll give a command, he'll give a little context, and then he'll give a little opportunity for consideration. And so the first thing that he did when he started this book was ask us to consider trials. You can talk about something that's universal, not just to all the known churches at the time, but to all the churches until the end of time. The reality of trials is real, and we can try to avoid them. We can try to minimize them. We can rationalize. We can blame. But he instructs us to consider them and consider the opportunity in them, and even so boldly to say, consider joy in the midst of them, because trials give us a chance to learn endurance. Endurance is a pretty good thing. But it's not the only thing, because sometimes I can be enduring and not very endearing. I can be enduring. Sometimes I can be the last man standing, but at great cost to those around me, or great cost to myself. So endurance isn't the end. But if we are able to endure, then there's the opportunity for us to gain maturity in the midst of trials. So enduring something with consideration. God, are you here? What might be you doing with this? And is there help available out there somewhere? Is there something that I can learn? Something I can receive? In the process, and that leads to maturity. And maturity allows our actions to become different. It gives us choice, so that when we take action in the midst of a circumstance or situation, maturity, often through trials, gives us a chance to act different, be different. And on many occasions, I've met people and gotten to know them and just come back and said, here's this great person over here. They're kind and patient. They're a great listener. Man, they're really considerate to others. They must have been born well and raised good. and all that. Then you get to know a little bit more about them. And usually it's not the case that they were just born good and raised good and had an easy road and they've just got so much goodness to come out of them. It's usually the opposite, that trials have affected and shaped them, that their perspective is different, that there's a humility, and that has led to a patience. And so James starts talking about trials, and he's going to end talking about patience. And so in the middle, in an effort to get us there, he gave us this dandy little ditty to remember. Y'all know what a ditty is? A Tennessee term. It's a little ditty. And here it is. Quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry. So if we don't know what else to do, just keep that in mind. Let's be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry. That helps us with perspective, humility, and patience. And so all of that kind of brings us to today's text at the end of 4, beginning of 5. So he says, hey, be considered in trials. And then he also says, hey, be careful when you consider boasting. Now, I'm glad all of y'all are here today. But if none of y'all were here, I believe I would be standing here talking to myself. Hey, be careful when you consider boasting, Steve. And here's the things that we generally, when I say we, I'm speaking less universally and kind of more in our family, maybe in our demographic, maybe in our socioeconomic place, maybe even in our geographical place. These tend to be the things that we need special care for. We have a tendency to boast about the future. Some of us have long engagements. I'm going to get engaged, but we're going to wait until this perfect day of the year, and we're going to get married there at this perfect place, and this is what it's going to look like, and this is how it's going to compare to other people's weddings. And then we're going to start our family, and we're going to wait until we're at this place when we're really ready, and then we're going to have these many kids, and we really want to have the girl first because, no, we need to have the boy first, because if you have the girl first, she's pretty squared away, and then you have the boy, and you think, oh my God, what's wrong with the boy? So we're going to do it in that order because that makes the most sense. And then we're going to raise them this way, because if we raise them this way, they're definitely going to turn out that way, and then they're going to validate me as parents for the rest of the world to see. And we have a tendency to think that that's going to be the case. And I could go on and on and on. And James says, hey, be careful. Be careful. And it's good to listen to James. So we can boast about the future. He also says we can boast about our schemes. Hey, we're going to move here. This is how it's going to turn out. These are going to be our friends. This is going to be our church. We're going to get into this school district so that, these scholarships will come, or we'll play these sports and these travel teams, and we can go to this college, get in that fraternity so we can meet a girl from that sorority, and then that's going to lead to this and that and the other. And all of that is going to create a situation where we have more than enough. Definitely more than our parents, because there's some kind of standard out there that says we got to do better than them somehow. And so James says, be careful, because when we move towards success, reputation, and security, then we're getting into if-then statements with God. Kind of this mathematical formula with God. Hey, God, I'm doing this, so you'll do that. And that can get complicated because God's not a mathematician. He's got a little whimsy in him. He's got a little art, not so much science all the time. And so James just says, be careful, because what's at stake? Our hearts. Our hearts are at stake. And sometimes bitterness and hardness of heart and resentment can kind of sink down into us when we think if, then is the way that God works. So he says, just be careful. And so he gives us a couple things that are going to give us a chance for humility. One of them is time. Sometimes stuff just takes a long time. And during that process, we have a chance to learn humility. Hey, you still messing around with such, you still doing such and such? You still trying to fix that car up? Yeah, I've hit a wall. I ran out of money, or I've run out of time, or my shoulder hurts and I can't. All right, man, stay with it. Yeah, sometimes it's just time. And we've mentioned this before when for generations, whenever we came to church, we would walk through the cemetery to get to the church. It's the way it was. Hundreds and hundreds of years. Some of y'all may have gone to churches in your lifetime where you went through the cemetery to get to church. Now we go to these really cool buildings. And sometimes we can forget that a lot of what we're doing here is to prepare us for the inevitability that we're only here for a moment. And so sometimes when the cemetery is not attached to the church, we can think the church is just to make our life a little bit better while we're here. And that's the deal that we have with God. God, I'm going to give you a little of this. You're going to make my life a little better. And so time and age and eventually death is kind of that last opportunity for humility to come if it doesn't come before that. But there are opportunities for it to come before that. And so James says, let's talk about those. And so one of the things that James talks about in this little bitty, we've got 5 chapters, we've got over 30 references to nature in the book. Because we can do all kinds of stuff. We are smart people, but we can't make it rain or stop rain. We don't know how the wind blows, nor can we see it, nor can we control it. And so a lot of times we make big plans and we make contingency plans based upon weather. What's the weather plan? Plan A in the rain. That's my favorite weather plan. But we do that. We make allowance for that because we know we can't just rule over or outsmart nature. And so we give it a little bit of benefit of the doubt. And James says, take that same attitude with many, many, many other things as well. Why? So our hearts won't turn bitter or resentful towards God or others. And so text we're going to kind of get to today at the end of 4, first to 5. Also, don't boast about possessions. So James is going to put his ghost of Christmas future persona on here in verse 1 through 6 of chapter 5. And he's going to kind of don the role of an Old Testament prophet, kind of speaking woe. And it's kind of a fait accompli. He's speaking of future things as if they have already happened. So the inevitability of earthly possessions decaying and disappointing is real. So this is the definitive passage in Scripture on there are no U-Hauls attached to hearses. That we're not pulling those things with us into the afterlife. And man, this is a great text to turn to in August when your church is Fellowship 30A Church, and we're one of the most affluent zip codes in the United States of America. And so how do we dig into this? What's God saying to us here? And he is saying simply this: How does the inevitability of earthly possessions, decaying and disappointing, affect our attitudes and consequently our actions? Because attitudes affect actions. And so the inevitability of decay and or disappointment is true, and it is real. I know this because I know people. And every once in a while, I will have on my pastoral hat, and someone will say, "Hey man, I got a question for you." Which, by the way, one of the favorite things Virginia and I do is sit at the coffee shop of 30A on Mondays from 10 to 12, which we'll get started back next Monday. Right on? Yep, next Monday. And we just sit there, and we're kind of like, if you remember the Peanuts cartoon, 5 cents for some advice, the little booth there. We're just listening, and you don't even need to bring 5 cents. And you don't need a topic. If you have a topic, we'll talk about it. If you have a question, if you have a theological log jam in your head, or if you just want to hang out with somebody on a Monday, we love posting up in there. All comers is kind of like office hour when you're in college and you got to go ask a question. Or if you want to brown nose the professor, make them think you're really paying attention and interested, just come on down. We love hanging out. But from time to time, I talk to people here, and nobody's from here. And so it's always like, what brings you here? How'd you get here? How long you been here? That whole thing. And you can talk to retirees, you can talk to remote workers, you can talk to people who came with cash in 2007 and bought stuff for 50 cents on the dollar. You can talk to people who came during COVID because they lived in a city that was not letting you do anything, and they came here then. And a lot of them have money. And I'm speaking relatively universally. On a scale of the world, money. And so there's in my unscientific research, there's one of 4 ways people have made money to be able to live here. And I live here. You're lucky. You're just real lucky, or you're real creative. Like really lucky, like I inherited something, or I won the lottery, or I'm just like super creative and I found a way to kind of translate that into money. So that's one, not too many of those folks. Some of these folks, you have a skill that you have learned, practiced, and the culture that we live in values that skill significantly. Partly because the people who don't have that skill don't want to do the thing that is, and you do. And so you have worked hard, honed your craft, risked a lot usually, and you're able to do that thing. Thirdly, and I'm going somewhere here, you're just a genius investor. Like you can just go, boom, and punch the button, and it's gone well, and that's awesome. That's a lot of fun. So I've gotten to know some of those people. But for the most part, everybody else that I've met falls into the 4th category. Effort. Work. Grind. Sacrifice. Get up and do it again. Work. Some of it's mundane, some of it's exciting, some of it's been boom or bust, but for the most part, people have just put their hands on the plow and gone after it. Now, here's the challenge with that. We always want to do better. Not because we're bad or prideful, but because that's what we've been taught. And that's how we can help others. And that's how we can have security. And that's how we can provide. And that's how we can support the church. And that's how we can be generous. And that's how we can do those things. But often to do that, we've had to say no to some other things. We've had to say no to some of us living in the same place for a long time and generating lifelong friends. Some of us have had to say no to as much time as we wanted with a spouse. Some of us have said no to as much time as we wanted during formative years of our kids' lives. Some of us haven't been as active in spiritual things or in community things because we're busy or we're moving around. It doesn't mean we're bad people. It's just there's a cost in this life. There are limitations in this world. Some of us have had to be around industries or coworkers where we had to be very careful or defensive, not trusting. And we had to kind of have that in place, and that has costs to it. And so what James is saying here is be careful in boasting, because life is a vapor. It's short. And one of the beautiful things about the calling that I feel like Virginia and I have in being here is we get to spend a lot of time with people who are in a season of life where they have this window of opportunity to consider the whole of their lives. They can look back, they can think about where they are now, and they can think a little bit about the future. And some of these places where they had to say no to some things to get where they are, they're reconsidering those. They're considering reconciling things. They're considering having better relationships with kids, even if their kids are 45 years old. They're considering having a different relationship with grandkids than they did with their own kids. They're considering what would it be like in a season of marriage where I wasn't defined by this or had a lot of my identity in that. And some of them are considering, man, I wasn't able to be involved in church, or I didn't take my role seriously enough during that season. Might there be an opportunity now? Might there be an opportunity now? And so it's a beautiful part of our calling, being here, being able to listen and be in some of those conversations with folks. And so as James says, be careful in our boasting, here's what he says are really two opportunities that we have. When we realize that possessions are temporary, they're going to decay, or they're potentially not going to give us what we thought they might. We can either choose arrogance, which usually takes the form of being, doubling down and being a miser and being stingy. And it's like, if this doesn't do it, then maybe more will. And sometimes we can become overly concerned with that. We can become suspicious. I don't have a ton of money in my retirement account, but I swear, I don't think Vanguard's managing it right. And I'm looking at the website, they're always moving the website around and changing it, and it's always under construction. And I'm like, man, I don't even know. And I'm smart. I pay attention, but it can make you suspicious. You know what I'm talking about? Some money managers in the room, I know your customers never get suspicious of you, but you know what I'm talking about? We can get suspicious, or we can get paranoid, just think about it too much. Sometimes we can get indulgent and go, I've got more than I need. I might as well just use it all. Sometimes we can get demanding. Sometimes we can become callous of others. And sometimes we can become indifferent. And that happened to me this week. We live right across the street from Goat Feathers. It burned on Wednesday. They're rerouting traffic through our neighborhood. And I had this thought. I hope they build something cool back there. It's right at my neighborhood. Building's old. Glad they made it through the summer busy season. Hope they build something cool back. Hope they don't just put 3 big houses there. We need stuff cool in the neighborhood. Maybe something I'd like to go to, maybe with a nice patio. What about me? So I had a guy that I'm getting to know in my neighborhood. He came over Thursday. We were talking about it. And he looked at me and he said, you know, it's the end of the summer. Where are their workers going to go pick up shifts right now? And I thought, dang. I thought about that none when I was thinking about me. I'm a pastor, for crying out loud. But because I'm not a shift worker right now in a restaurant, I've lost touch. This time last year, my son was a shift worker in a restaurant. Yeah, I've lost touch with how a lot of the world lives. So I was talking to this guy that I'm just now getting to know, and we texted a little bit over the weekend, and I just thought, here I am looking at this text and thinking about, at the very least, we can become callous and indifferent, just like missing where a lot of people are living, and we don't want that. So what's the other choice? The other choice is humility. So if we're not boasting, we can have humility in our stuff. And this is a wonderful thing, and it's called stewardship, and it's a beautiful principle theme in the scriptures that we have a hard time understanding because it's not really a word we use in America a lot. We don't think about being stewards. We don't think about being stewards of the land normally. We don't think about being stewards of our bodies, because sometimes when we're given more than effort, one of the things that we say no to sometimes is our own personal health, because we don't really take seriously, and we're not really enforced culturally, the concept of stewardship of a friendship or trust or time or opportunity or season of life. And so humility leads to good stewardship, because money is a pretty neat thing, y'all. It is. It's a pretty neat thing. It's needed to live, and it can do some great good. Some have more because some have less. Some make more because some occupations make less. It's just how our culture is. It's okay. But money can open doors, and it can create opportunities if it's used well. And so 2 Corinthians 8 is this great seminal passage in the New Testament, which is Paul's version of this. And he kind of references the time of the Exodus, where for 4 years, basically, manna was provided daily so God's people could eat. And if you didn't get it by noon, it was rotted. So you couldn't be lazy and kind of wake up and go, I'm hungry. Well, you better get up and get some manna. But you also couldn't hoard it because it rotted and then it stunk. But you know, that didn't happen because eventually they figured out, hey, I'm pretty good at gathering manna, and some other people over here need it when I got more. Because if I have too much, it's going to rot. And if they don't have enough, they're going to starve. They figured it out. And so Paul in 2 Corinthians 8 basically says the exact same thing. And so what's really at stake? The opportunity that money gives us to open doors and to be good stewards, to be hospitable, to be generous, to have enough security and comfort that we can stand there and offer from a place of foundational okayness. We can offer something. When we're teetering on the edge, it's hard to offer anything. But when we have a place of stability, we can offer. And the Bible leads us to offer most significantly in the area of relationships. So there's this really weird chapter in Luke 16. Luke 15 is about forgiveness. Lost sheep, lost coin, lost son. We know those stories. The very next chapter is this weird story about the unjust manager. And here's the essence of it, and it's a big old story by Jesus. Hey, there was a manager. He wasn't great at his job, so he was going to get fired. And so he went, I'm too lazy to work, and I'm too proud to beg. What am I going to do? And then he went, I know what I'll do. With my 2 weeks notice, I'm going to go to all of the clients of my boss and say, hey man, you owe 40 liters of olive oil. Tell you what, you give me 30 and we'll call it clean. Okay. And he systematically does that. And then it says the manager, the boss comes home and you're thinking, this guy's about to get it. I can't wait to see what's going to happen. And it's a crazy thing that happens because his boss says, doggone it, you're pretty wise. Because what you did was you used the capital you had to build friendships. And then he says, hey, the people of the world are more creative and generous in dealing with each other than the people of God are. Because they understand that. And we never preach that. We never talk about Luke 16. Because it's like, I don't want it to go that way. But the emphasis of Jesus is what we have is an opportunity to build friendships and build relationships, create a conversation, tell a story, change the narrative. Whatever it is we want to say that's out there about people with money or Christians or the church, because there is a perception that's out there. Right, wrong, or indifferent, it's out there. And we have an opportunity to kind of go, so you think? And so how do we land the plane here? This is what I think. Proverbs 24 says this way. Put the outdoor work in order before you build your house. Put your outdoor work in order before you build your house. And in the times of Proverbs, that meant, you better get your fields together. You better get your barn. You better get your well. You might want to think about a wall, a way to kind of control your animals before you build your house. Because our house, that's kind of our creature comforts and those kinds of things. And so there's a priority and then there's a secondary. And the priority is do the things that are going to create foundational purpose, identity, and real security before we build the things that give us what we want and what we enjoy. Is this an anti-money text? Absolutely not. This is a perspective text. So 2 things in closing. And this is kind of an origin story. Probably wouldn't be here today if we hadn't been able to work for 20 years for Young Life in Jackson, Tennessee. Jackson, Tennessee is a small town, blue-collar town. And we were on Young Life staff there through a recession. We were on Young Life staff there through a huge season of churches building big buildings, capital campaigns. And we were there, it's the rural South. And so lots of private schools were built during that season. And, schools be raising money and churches be raising money. And people supported Young Life with what was left. And we had some very generous supporters. But we didn't have huge supporters. We had $35 a month supporters, $100 a month supporters. When we got there, we were able to take the 2 or 3 schools that we were in and eventually go to 8 or 9 schools. And then we were eventually able to go into some rural counties that absolutely positively should not have been able to have Young Life in them. And so one of the reasons that we were able to do that is a few families. And none of them were big business folks. And none of them made huge one-time gifts. But one family in particular gave over the course before I got there, after I left. A hardworking guy in a very difficult industry. And I went to him once and said, hey, why don't you retire? I had a bunch of kids, some of them adopted. They were doing things. They loved to travel. They got to travel a lot. But I'm like, dude, why don't you? And he said, well, there's two things we really love supporting. And one of them is you. And I'd like to say their life was easy, but it was not. We were in 2 or 3 schools. We wound up being in 9 and a bunch of more communities pretty directly because of their faithfulness. They, I'm sure, gave more money to their church than they did Young Life. I'm just, maybe not. But their church, through a couple of different non-related things, closed. It went out of business and closed. And I know what they'd given to Young Life. And I'm thinking, if they had given this much to the church and it closed, I'm like, I'm done. They didn't do that. They went to the downtown in our area on Sunday mornings and put some chairs out, started doing church themselves. That's not a successful business model. But they didn't care. And they started having people over their house on Sunday nights. Whoever would come, sit around, look at some scripture, pray, do that kind of thing. Well, then they did this. Their daughter had lived in Denver for a while and got this crazy idea that you can have a cafe that people don't have to pay for. It's another great business model. So they started this thing in Jackson, Tennessee, not an innovative hub. And so they started this cafe in 2013 where you didn't have to pay. Because you know what? If I want to get together with somebody, we can do it over lunch. And we can pick somewhere to go and we can order off a menu. And we can do that whole thing. It's like, you going to get this one? Am I going to get this one? Oh, I'll get the next one. But that's not how most of the world lives. Most of the world's never ordered off a menu ever, including people in our town. And so they said, you know what? We're going to start this cafe and it's going to be simple. We got 2 soups, 2 sandwiches, 2 salads. You can pick whatever you want and it's suggested donation. And it's family style tables. So if you're by yourself, you don't have to deal with the indignity of not having anybody to eat with. And if you're somebody like me from the suburbs, you might have to get in there and deal with somebody that just came in from the street. And they had a real subtle way where you could kind of earn your lunch. Because everybody wants to earn their lunch. So they had some chores and some jobs around there where you could kind of earn your lunch. And you know who worked there? Felons. What? Why? Because they need resumes so they can get jobs when they get out of jail. But who wants to risk hiring them first? They do. So, here's my point. Oh, by the way, we've been back to Jackson a lot. I have not gone back there because I miss it too much. Just haven't been able to do it yet. So, thank y'all for letting me tell that story. Origin stories are important. But I mentioned goat feathers earlier, and I was talking to this guy that I'm getting to know. And I said, you know what? I can't start a cafe here where people don't have to pay. But I don't think goat feather workers have a real big chance for unemployment in the line of work they're in. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to do something about it. There's 8 miles between the two goat feathers locations on 30A. I like to run, I like to walk, I like to ride my bike. And I'm going to do one of those 3 between those 2 locations. It's 8 miles, and I'm going to raise $100 a mile. And I'm going to give it to the goat feathers workers. And I got to thinking about that, talking to this guy and a few friends of mine, and people are like, I want in on that. Said something to Donnie this morning. Donnie's like, I'll do that. And I thought, maybe it's something that we can do. If our leadership team says, sure. And maybe, just maybe, that right there is something that matters more than pretty signs we put up on corners, or ads we run in the paper, or good language that we put on our website that we're redoing, talking about our distinctives and how we're this or that. Maybe, just maybe, that's the kind of thing that really affects the narrative of what people think about God or Christians or pastors or churches. I could be wrong. I'm willing to be wrong for the chance of maybe not being wrong. So stay tuned, and maybe, just maybe, we can have a little fun walking, riding, or running a section, of some of that 8 miles. Maybe that would be a good thing that would be an action that comes from the attitude that God has shaped and changed in us about our lives and our opportunity here. Let's pray together. Father, thank you for these friends, and thank you for their hearts, their response, their engagement. Thank you for placing us where you have in our community, for affecting our hearts and giving us a sense of identity and purpose during this season of life where we have perspective, humility, where we have resources. And so thank you for giving us a voice, and thank you for giving us a vote in the world around us. May we be useful to your purposes as long as it's day. In Jesus' name, amen. Great being with you all. Missed you last week. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.